morning. My name is Brian Raymond. I'm the Director of Technology Policy for the National Association of Manufacturers. And we are happy that all of you can join us on an issue that is very important to manufacturers, and that is intellectual property and the threat of the theft of that intellectual property and the impact it has, the economic impact it has on all manufacturers. Manufacturers leverage technology in every aspect of their business, in their products, in their processes, in their enterprise, and throughout their shop floors and throughout their entire ecosystem of everything that they do. That is why the NAM is engaged in technology policy. In fact, at the NAM, we like to say that manufacturing companies are technology companies. Therefore, we have a robust technology policy agenda focused on a number of issues. A pillar of our technology policy advocacy efforts is intellectual property and protecting that intellectual property. That is frankly why we have teamed up with the National Alliance for Jobs and Innovation for this event today. We are pleased to be a part of NAJI, as it is known, a group of about 400 manufacturers working with governments at all levels, from countries all around the world, to fight against those companies that are unfairly competing against manufacturers that play by the rules by using stolen intellectual property, stolen software to compete against those that pay for that software. We, to illustrate that point, we surveyed our members. The survey results of which are in front of you today, and hopefully those folks on the phone have that as well. If you want to access that information later, we have launched a website, iptheft.nam.org, where you can find the full results of that survey. But what I'd like to do, however, is maybe highlight a few of those numbers to really drive home the fact as to why we're engaged in this issue, to illustrate why intellectual property is so important to manufacturers. We went out and asked our members how important is intellectual property to the success of their business. Almost 90% of them said intellectual property is important to their business. So as you'll hear from the manufacturers that are here today, as you'll hear from the results from the study that we're also releasing today in partnership with NAJI, we really feel that drives the point home when we heard from 90% of our manufacturers that intellectual property was important to them. To that point, we then asked them the threat of that intellectual property being stolen. How much does that matter to you? How much does that concern you? How important is that to the continued success of your business? Again, 90% of manufacturers said that threat of IP being stolen causes them concern. It causes them concern to the success of their business. Of course, technology comes in many different forms, hardware, software, etc. But in the context of what we're working on today, we asked them, how important is software to your business? 79% of manufacturers said software is important to their business. So obviously when we're talking about technology, we're talking about software. It is a critical component of what manufacturers do today. So those numbers speak for themselves, pretty eye-opening numbers. But the point being is that technology drives manufacturing. Manufacturers drive technology. That's why we're involved here today. So in addition to the survey results that you have in front of you, we were pleased to partner. The NAM's chief economist was pleased to partner with Bill Kerr from Harvard Business School today, which on a study that goes deeper into the economic impact of IP theft. Bill is going to talk extensively about the results and the methodology of that study to go along with the survey result that we're releasing today. As I mentioned, I'm flanked here by manufacturers that live this, breathe this, that are technologies embedded in everything that they do, and they're going to talk about IP theft. They're going to talk about the importance of IP to their business, frankly, and the impact that IP theft has on their business, or possibly could have on their business. But what I want to do now is turn it over to someone who has worked this issue from both sides of the desk. First as the Attorney General of the great state of Washington, and now as the President of NAJI, and that's Rob McKenna. So Rob, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Brian. It's important for us all to be here today for the announcement of a major study, which is the first of its kind, examining the impact of IP theft, in particular of software, on manufacturing jobs in the United States. I co-founded the IP task force at the National Association of AGs nearly 7 years ago. because attorneys general across the country have been deeply concerned about intellectual property theft and the impact of that theft not only on jobs in America, but on consumer safety and welfare. When you think about piracy and counterfeiting of American products ranging from pharmaceuticals to brake pads to a host of other products, you realize this is a serious threat that's of concern to every American. What we didn't have was a link, documented link between the impacts of trade secret intellectual property theft on American jobs and that theft. Now we have it. Today, we're going to be hearing, first of all, from Professor Bill Kerr from Harvard Business School, co-author of the study. We'll then hear from Drew Greenblatt, president and owner of Marlin Steel and chairman of the National Alliance for Jobs and Innovation, or NAJI. NAJI was started in 2012 with Mr. Greenblatt's assistance. We now have nearly 400 members, both manufacturers, technology companies, but also associations of other businesses that represent even more companies who are involved. We'll then turn from Drew Greenblatt to Dan Abu-Nabi, President and CEO of Emergent BioSolutions, who will share his story, and we'll hear from Michael Sigourney, CEO of AVTECH. Then we'll go to a moderated Q&A period. Thanks to all of you from the media who are participating in this today, and thanks to NAM for hosting us here today. Let's start with Bill Kerr, Associate Professor of Business Administration at Harvard and co-author of the study that we're announcing today. Bill?
Great. Thank you, Rob, and good morning to everyone. I guess I have to make an apology up front, both to those present, but even more to those dialing in from the West Coast. We're going to have to discuss some numbers and some figures, and it might be a little early in the day to necessarily embark on that path, but I think it's very important. We have panelists that are going to be able to talk about case studies. We have legal arguments that we can bring about this, but we also need to be able to put some numbers behind this. We need to be able to quantify the effects and develop some figures, and that's what this study's been working to do. What we sought to do was understand the impact of software piracy on U.S. manufacturing jobs, revenues, and value added. And we want to do this for two perspectives. We first want to understand where we are today, so what's happened over the last decade, what do the trends look like, and then also, and constructively looking forward, we want to understand what would be the impact from reductions in piracy. So if we were able to counteract the negative trends we're currently experiencing, what would be the opportunity for the U.S. sector size and its development? I have sort of two big things to highlight before we begin talking about the calculations in a little bit more specific detail. But the first is to understand that at a broad level, we're thinking about U.S. manufacturing and its attempts to acquire customers within the United States and outside the United States. This isn't just about competition for customers in Michigan or in Texas. We're thinking about customers in Brazil and in Japan and worldwide as U.S. manufacturers compete. And that global perspective will come out at various points in our talk. The second thing that I want to highlight, and this will be as a segue into the panelists that will follow me, is that I'm just going to be talking today about prepackaged software, so non-customized, off-the-shelf software, and that's only one slice of a very big IP problem that we're facing. And I want to highlight that in advance so that we're thinking about that this is just the first element of this larger issue, and that we need to be thinking about further where we go from there. Our calculations have two basic components. The first component is we need to understand the cost advantages that software piracy delivers to people that are breaking the law. To do this, we're going to have three basic ingredients that we're going to work with. The first ingredient is we need to understand what portion of the costs and the production functions of manufacturing are to software, to prepackaged off-the-shelf software. We use data from the IDC and from related sources, and that current estimate is about 0.75%. That estimate has been growing over time. So as manufacturers become increasingly high-tech, as it was noted in the introduction, the software share has been growing. It's basically doubled over the last decade. So that's the first element, is understanding how software impacts the production and cost that manufacturers face. And the next thing we need to do is we need to understand piracy. What's the level of piracy that's out there in this competition that U.S. firms are engaged in? We have to understand that there's different levels of piracy across the world in different countries, and that also countries are engaged in global trade for manufacturing. And so to identify how the competition plays out for both exports as well as also for sales to the United States, we need to understand what would be the global piracy rate. The The way we calculate that is we use the piracy rates that are across countries, along with the share that each country is accounting for manufacturing trade. So we're coming out with a trade-weighted or sort of a global-weighted average basis of the piracy rates. That number today is currently about 52%. So about 52% of potential software expenditures are pirated on a global basis, which is obviously a very big number, and it's a number that's increasing over time. That number was about 44% a decade ago, so it's a growing number. The last thing that we need to have in order to understand the cost calculations, we need to understand some supply chain considerations. The fact that it's not just a potential neglect to pay the software that I'm currently using, but I also may be able to, if I'm in a foreign country and pulling from suppliers that are engaged in software piracy, that may lower my material costs. So those are the three basic components that go into our cost calculation. How much does software matter in the production function? What's the piracy rate that's around the world? And thinking about the supply chain considerations after that. From there, we take that cost advantage into the second half of our calculation. This is more of a statistical analysis, but we need to understand how does this cost advantage then translate into jobs and revenues and output for U.S. firms. The way we do that is we look across the last decade at the performance of industries within the manufacturing sector, their costs and the prices and the output levels, and we develop statistical relationships that are the feedback effect that goes through this. To give an example of one of those calculations, for every 1% increase in the cost advantages that as a total share of the production function that a foreign producer could have, that would translate into 1.4% lower employment for U.S. manufacturers as a consequence. So with these two building blocks, we can now think about both where we are in the U.S. today, and then also what do scenarios look like going forward. So first, looking back in time, we estimate that over the last decade, and specifically from 2002 to 2012, the U.S. lost roughly $240 billion in manufacturing revenue due to software piracy abroad during that period of time, which is a substantial number. If we now turn this attention and look forward, what we do is we think about a scenario where we will reduce software piracy by 10% over the next 4 years. So it goes from 52% to 42%. That's roughly basically correcting the increase that we observed over the last decade, in a clip of about 2.5% per year. This by itself would offer substantial contributions. We think it's going to be in the neighborhood of 27,000 jobs and $30 billion in revenue across that period. This would be something that would then be sustained and would be ongoing in every year that falls after that. And so this is material importance for the industry and its development, especially in some of the difficult times that we've currently faced. I don't want to monopolize the time, and again, it's a little too early for too much math, but let me close with two final points that I'd like to make. The first is that the study also gets into questions around innovation. And we can think about that inventors have lots of incentives to innovate, especially when the market sizes that they're going to sell to are bigger. And so if you're going to build a new mousetrap, if there's a worldwide market you can access for mousetraps, that's more attractive and will lead to greater innovation. Not only will we have immediate effects in terms of the employment declines that we're facing in manufacturing today, but to the degree that piracy lowers the worldwide markets that our manufacturers are innovating for, that can reduce some of the incentives. And in the paper, we talk about the reduction in patents and innovation that's occurred that way. And then second, I want to go back and emphasize the point I made at the beginning, which is this study looked at non-custom, off-the-shelf software, prepackaged software as it might otherwise be known. And that's one big component of an overall IP group that includes things like intellectual property secrets, trade secrets, and similar. And we need to think about those numbers even being above and beyond what the study was able to quantify. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Bill. Next, I want to turn to Drew Greenblatt, CEO and President of Marlin Steel, an owner, more importantly, of Marlin Steel, and we're very happy to have you as Chairman of NAJI. Thank you, Drew.
Thank you. This is a topic that is not theoretical. It's impacting American jobs today. And if we take this seriously and vigorously pursue aggressive intellectual property rights protection, we are going to grow American jobs over the next decade vigorously. And this is going to help us get out of the recession. Let me give you Marlin's perspective. For 30 years, we were a commodity bagel basket manufacturer. It was a good place to be. Like many American manufacturing entities, commodity was fine because we didn't have any substantial foreign threats. Around in the early 2000s, foreign manufacturers started dumping bagel baskets into our country. That was a devastating blow to my company. We were making a commodity part. Literally, we could be plus or minus an inch on our basket, okay? Because our clients, the bagel shop owners, couldn't care whether or not it was an inch off. They didn't even know the tape measure. So this was the market we were selling into, and the Chinese and other foreign nationals thrust inexpensive imported baskets. They were dumping them onto the market cheaper than we could buy the steel. So we had a terrible situation. We were hemorrhaging cash. We had no alternatives. We were either going to go under or we were going to transform. And this is what has happened to American manufacturing over the last decade or so. They've had to migrate from the commodity player that had no shot versus coming up with things that would provide tremendous intellectual property to differentiate them, to make them distinct and unique. So Marlin morphed. We transformed into a highly engineered material handling basket company. This has led us to great success and prosperity, and we have thrived over the last couple of years because of this strategy shift. But this is common among many manufacturing companies. 20% of our employees are now degreed mechanical engineers, coming up with very innovative ideas, generating amazing intellectual property. This is our moat against foreign competition. This is why we're growing. Matter of fact, we're growing so much that we're actually exporting. 25% of our sales are overseas. And my favorite is we export to China, material handling baskets to China, all made 100% in the USA. So our country has to protect these intellectual property rights, because that's the difference between us and just selling the lowest quality, lowest cost products. We pay our employees 4 times more. Where do we get this money? Because we have a product that's different and that's unique. So it's critical that we don't let intellectual property rights be undermined. We cannot let these property rights be stolen. For example, right now, over 20 Chinese and Indian companies have cut and paste pictures from my website and put it onto their website, pretending that they are making this highly engineered product. But this is just thematic for all of American manufacturing. We can't have our stuff cut and paste and representing their intellectual property. It's our property. We're investing in it, and this is our secret sauce, and this is what makes us different. And that's why this National Alliance for Jobs and Innovation is so very important. And this coalition of 400 member factory companies in domestically and overseas care so much about this change. We need strong intellectual property rights so that we could grow our companies and continue thriving and lead the turnaround on this recession. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Drew. Next, we'll hear from Dan Abu-Nabi, President and CEO of Emergent BioSolutions.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and I'm pleased to be here to talk about such an important problem and issue facing all of us. Emergent BioSolutions is a global specialty pharmaceutical company, and we're known for manufacturing pharmaceutical products that protect and enhance lives. For us, it is critically important to protect our intellectual property and our IT infrastructure. These are part of our foundation for manufacturing and delivering safe and effective and dependable products. In our industry, IP takes several forms: patents, trade secrets, proprietary materials, technical know-how, branding, and the like. Safeguarding that IP is absolutely critical to our business. It enables us to expand manufacturing in the U.S., it enables job creation, it supports our financial health, and most importantly, it protects public health by ensuring that physicians and patients receive safe and effective products that meet quality and other regulatory standards. When IP rights are violated, it can have a devastating impact not only on the manufacturers, but also on public health and the well-being of patients. We're all well aware of counterfeit products such as fake Rolex watches and Chanel purses, but what you might not be aware of is over the past decade, the problem of counterfeit medicines has grown dramatically. For example, I'm sure you've heard about counterfeit medicines that are being sold to consumers, direct to consumers, by bogus internet pharmacies. In 2012, the problem became more acute when counterfeit Avastin entered the U.S. supply chain for administration to cancer patients. Just for context, Avastin is approved in over 100 countries. It is approved for several treatments of cancers, and it's generating more than $5 billion a year in annual revenue. The counterfeit that was introduced into the U.S. supply chain did not contain the active ingredient normally found in Avastin. The U.S. government conducted a very thorough investigation and traced this counterfeit product from the U.S. back to the UK, then back to Denmark, then into Switzerland, and then off to Turkey, and that's when the trail went cold. They were not able to find out who manufactured the product or where it came from. Importantly, the FDA said the fake Avastin was the first U.S. case involving a counterfeit version of a cancer drug meant to be administered in a physician's office. This is a significant event. Eventually, the crisis expanded to more than 75 physicians across 22 states. The point here is that the theft of IP involving life-saving drugs has dramatic impact. Not only do the manufacturers face potential economic loss, more importantly, patients are denied the benefit of life-saving therapies. It is a real public health threat. So a little closer to home, the theft of Emergent's intellectual property could impair our manufacturing expansion, our job creation, our revenue growth, and our overall business plans for growth. And let me provide a specific example for you. Emergent BioSolutions is the manufacturer of the only FDA-approved vaccine for the prevention of anthrax disease. We manufacture that product right here in the United States, in fact in the state of Michigan, and we have been expanding our global presence through international registrations across the globe. We've received regulatory approvals in a number of foreign jurisdictions, and we decided to further expand our product profile through registration in China. The Chinese regulatory authorities, as a condition to approval, insisted that they have access to our intellectual property, including our proprietary data, our proprietary testing methods, and proprietary materials. And this was all as a condition to approval. But having had registration in other foreign jurisdictions, we reached the conclusion that this was not a valid regulatory request. And we came to the conclusion that this was all about enabling Chinese manufacturing of our proprietary product. In addition, we concluded that if that manufacturing were to occur, we would not be in a position to enforce our intellectual property rights, given the lax IP protections in that country. So what did we do? We walked away from the market. We lost potential revenue, we lost job growth opportunity, and we lost manufacturing growth opportunity. Following our decision to withdraw the registration in China, we experienced an attack on our IT systems here in the United States. And the attack emanated from China and targeted our intellectual property. We successfully defended against that IT attack, but it took tremendous resources, a lot of employee effort, and a lot of management time. But most importantly, if the perpetrators were successful, they not only steal our valuable and proprietary information, but they also undermine jobs, they undermine economic growth, and they also pose the threat of an introduction of a counterfeit vaccine into the supply chain. So Emergent continues to support enhancing and protecting enforcement of laws that protect IP from threat and improper use, Congress, FBI, state and federal agencies have made a tremendous progress in addressing this threat, but much more needs to be done. We applaud those efforts. The manufacturing sector would certainly benefit from decreased intellectual property and IT piracy and a greater respect for rule of law. That would bring about expanded manufacturing, creation of new jobs, financial health for legitimate manufacturers, and in our industry, the prevention of counterfeit medicines from entering into the supply chain that could harm patients in need. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. Next, we'll hear from Michael Sigourney, CEO of AVTECH. Michael.
Thank you, Michael Sigourney, AVTECH Software, as mentioned. First, I want to thank both the National Association of Manufacturers and the National Association of Jobs and Innovation for pulling this together. I think that this topic is very important, and before I go on, I want to also thank Bill for consolidating a complex issue into something that's understandable in approximately 20 pages. So that's a big challenge I would never want to take on. And I want to thank Dan and Drew for great examples of larger companies that have a great story. It's interesting, AVTECH is a manufacturer of IT software and equipment that specializes in monitoring and managing IT equipment environments. So as an example, everybody in this room integrates their lives with our customers probably hundreds of times every day. Because our customers, even though they're only about 130,000 worldwide across 177 countries, includes every single branch of the U.S. government, every single branch of the U.S. military, all 50 state governments, every provincial government in Canada, every United Nations facility, every Amazon warehouse worldwide, yada, 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 a lot of things. So what we do is we protect the IT data centers so organizations like Dan's can hopefully keep their companies running. Because in order to do some of the innovative things that they do in medicine and other technologies, that IT equipment has to be running all the time. So although we are just a small 35-person company, and perhaps I'm here as the example of how the small company has to struggle against the world, our story, as I look back after listening to these gentlemen, is to think about the facts. For 26 years, we started out as a software company, and then we became a hardware company. One of the reasons was because a lot of our software was taken from us, and at one time when the internet started out, all of a sudden there were 1,400 manufacturers in our product category. Well, it's very hard for a startup company, 26 years ago to compete against 1,500 companies. So we started developing hardware, and we found a very good niche. And so what's happened over those last 26 years is we've had to reinvent ourselves multiple times, and part of it is because people come close to our technology. They see us being successful, and they come in and they snug up next to it. They didn't do the research, they didn't do the development, they took a look at where we are, and they said, you know what, let's whip something together, let's pull images from the website, let's pretend we have the same story, let's use our same marketing words, and voila, in this worldwide instant recognition where all you need is a web page that's found by Google, you're a competitor. Nobody visits our facility, none of our customers, very rarely. They don't do anything more than maybe get our email or talk to us on the phone. And so the playing field, there is no big barrier to entry. And there should be. The investment that I think a medical company puts into their technology, or manufacturing, very interesting story about how they manufacture differences and create smart baskets. Gee, I never thought of that. And yet, I brought a supermarket and put it onto our property. So the bottom line is, after 26 years, developing 130,000 customers, being in 177 countries, I'm still looking over my shoulder. What day do I come in and find out a big player has come into the market that we can't compete with? We were talking this morning at breakfast, some of the people from NAJI, and I was telling them about some of the things that we've done. 5 years ago, my company, as soon as the banks crashed, we bought a 68,000 square foot mill in Rhode Island. And you think, oh, you must be nuts. So what we did is we basically took our 35-person company, redeveloped this mill. It was called by the previous governor the best restoration of a mill in Rhode Island. And we continued to invest in our community. So we had contractors that stayed alive because of what we did. We are in Warren, Rhode Island, which is the smallest town in the smallest county in the smallest state in the United States. And so for that little playing field, we were a big fish. I always tease the wife about how I had to move to a really small pond so that I could pretend I was a big fish, but I don't really have a big ego, not too much. you have an ego if you're running a company, okay? But we have invested in our community. And so when you look at the work, the importance of protecting your IT so that you can be compensated for your efforts, so that you can not only grow your company, but reinvest in your community. We brought the only supermarket to Warren. I financed that supermarket. I bought the equipment for that supermarket. I sold it to him for $1 3 years later. The profits from that supermarket opened another supermarket in another neighboring town, which is a small town in Rhode Island. Now, who cares, right? I don't get a merit badge for that. But I know that I did something good. It didn't come out of AVTECH, but it shows you that when you protect the IP of a company, you protect that individual or that organization's ability to reinvest in their community. And so not only does it go directly to the bottom line of the U.S. economy, as Bill would say, but it gets multiplied over and over. And hopefully, as an example, other people are doing similar types of things. So I'll leave it at that so I don't consume all the time, and we'll deal with questions if you have any.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. So we're going to move to the moderated Q&A now for the remainder of our time. And we have someone who's handling questions. What we thought we'd do is alternate between questions from those of you in the room and those who are on the phone, if that's okay. So let me start to see if there are any questions from any of you who are here with us in person from the media. Yes, sir.
Hi, James Pileggi with the Financial Times. How much do you know about who is actually stealing the intellectual property in some of, we know where it's coming from, China, and you mentioned that in particular, and some other countries, but who in particular are you able to identify who these people are? And also, what can the government do to put pressure on China and other countries to clamp down on these practices and to kind of prosecute or pursue some of this behavior, or is it kind of endorsed or by the government? Therefore, is that a major concern?
Yeah, I can offer a comment on that, but from an enforcement standpoint. But Brian, let me ask you to start, and then any of our manufacturer CEOs just to comment on how how did you find out, and if we can just keep our answers really brief so we can get to as many questions as possible. Brian?
Sure, I'll just start very broadly and then turn it over to folks that actually have worked on these cases. Well, the best evidence to point to who is doing this, if you look at some of the suits that state AGs have already brought. In the state of Massachusetts, that was a seafood company in Thailand that was using stolen software to compete against a seafood company based in Massachusetts. So there's an example that the state AG did there, brought a suit against them, not a huge fine, but fined them $10,000 to send a message that if you use software unfairly, if you use stolen software and compete unfairly against a U.S. company, we're going to come after you. So there's one example. We've seen that example also happen in the state of Tennessee, the state of California, where, for example, California, an apparel manufacturer based in India, I think, correct me if I'm wrong,
and China,
was competing unfairly against an apparel manufacturer in the U.S. using stolen software to do that. So again, there's some real examples of the state AG doing the work, doing the research, doing the investigation to find out who's competing against them. I think I'd turn it over to, I maybe flip back to Rob or some of the other panelists so they can talk about exactly who has been competing against them, how they found out, but maybe some of the tools that the AGs use to actually enforce some of these actions.
Just a quick question on the,
Sure.
I guess, the legal side of it. So it would be the state AGs that are
on the front lines of this rather than the federal government pursuing cases?
I think right now is where you see a lot of the activity at the state level. I think the federal government, the FTC, has looked at this issue as well, but you're seeing most of the activity in the state government. I think the role of NAJI, of the National Alliance for Jobs and Innovation, is working with governments at all levels to enforce laws that are already on the books to go after folks that are using stolen software to compete unfairly.
At the federal level, the obvious agency to deal with this problem is the Federal Trade Commission, which enforces the FTC Act against unfair and deceptive trade practices. A couple of years ago, I led a group of nearly 40 state AGs writing a letter to the FTC asking them to use their authority under the FTC Act to go after IP theft. And we still hope that will happen. Secondly, this can be an issue in trade negotiations with the countries where we see a high level of IP theft, for example, Indonesia, China, Russia, and elsewhere. So we hope that will happen also. The thing is, we have to elevate the level of awareness of this problem so that people understand it's not just about software or about illegal downloads of content. It's about manufacturing jobs, and this impacts our entire economy. Raising awareness levels has helped get the AGs involved, and we hope to see more of them taking action, as well as the federal government.
And just one more point, NAJI has only been around for a year and a half.
Right.
And we started with 10 companies, now we're almost at to 400. So I mean, that's the point, right? That's what this study is. That's why we surveyed the NAM members and found that 90% of them care about this issue. Technology is important to their business, and 80% of them use software in their business. So that's part of this advocacy effort, to say that software is important, and when they don't play by the rules, they're impacting manufacturing and job growth in the U.S.
Tom Scholl with BioPrepWatch.com. Just a quick question, kind of piggybacking on the last one. Has there been any congressional reaction to this? Anything you're pushing there?
There hasn't been reaction to it since we're just announcing it for the first time today. In terms of the study, in terms of the overall problem, in terms of the overall problem, Congress has looked at the issue. Brian may, or his colleagues may be able to comment on potential legislation, but I think this is increasingly on the radar of policymakers at all levels of government, frankly, because they're learning more and more about the impact it's having on our economy and on consumer welfare. Brian, do you want to supplement that, or at all in terms of Drew? You've been active federally.
This is motherhood and apple pie. We got to protect our secret sauce. The reason why we're going to pay American manufacturing employees $77,000 a year on average is because they're making something really unique and different. It's not because we're doing menial. We don't want to get into a race to the bottom. We've got to protect our intellectual property, because that's what makes us different, and that's what makes us be able to thrive as a community. This is what's going to bring back the middle class in America.
One thing that the Congress could do that I'd like to see them do is to make it explicit in the Federal Trade Commission Act, the FTC Act, which is, of course, our nation's national consumer protection law, that IP theft is a violation of that law. The AGs believe that the law, correctly interpreted, covers IP theft, but we'd really, would benefit from an explicit statement of that rule, so that the FTC has even clearer authority. Secondly, Congress could call on the U.S. Trade Representative to elevate this issue in trade negotiations. And third, of course, with the current administration clearly focused on IP, the creation of an IP czar at the White House, there's interest there in elevating this issue as well.
Yeah, if I could add to that, at least in the pharmaceutical space, there has been tremendous focus on this because of the public health implications. There have been several hearings, and there have been research reports issued out of some congressional committees. Legislation has been moving forward on what they call track and trace to enable proper tracking of pharmaceutical products as they move through the supply chain. So there has been tremendous focus on this. As of yet, I think no final decisions have been made in terms of how best to address this from a legislative perspective, but it is on the radar.
I want to just remind everyone that the study that we're announcing today is available online, iptheft.nam.org, iptheft.nam.org. Encourage people to take a look at it. And also, Brian, can you clarify, is the member survey online as well? So both documents are the study and the member survey?
Correct. All the information that you have in front of you and the folks on the phone that can hear me, yes, it is all online.
Okay, very good.
Any closing comments from our panelists?
I'd like to go ahead and just answer a question that I thought James was sort of leading towards, and that is, you asked, how do we find out about some of the IP theft? And one of the ways that we find out is through our tech support and sales teams, where customers and resellers will bump into our products in the marketplace, and yet we haven't sold to those organizations. And sometimes customers will actually call us asking for tech support, and that they've never purchased anything from us. So somebody within an organization may have acquired a look-alike product or an illegally obtained product, and then of course they'll call us thinking, well, we've got it right here, you should be serving us. And we try to explain on the phone that we're not big enough to provide free worldwide service to people who haven't paid for the privilege. And so
for us, it's you just Google or Bing it, and you can clearly see all the theft, and it's rampant and it's unacceptable.
And just to put a kind of a bow on it, this is a manufacturing issue. manufacturers use software to compete globally. When folks don't buy that software, when they don't play by the rules, it hurts Drew, it hurts Dan, it hurts Michael, it hurts the entire manufacturing industry in the United States. That's why the NAM is involved in this, that's why we care about this, and that's why we partner with NAJI to do this.
All right. If there's nothing else, we'll wrap up. Thank you all very much for participating, and thanks again to NAM for their partnership in producing this study. Bill, excellent work. This is groundbreaking. We really appreciate it. And thanks to our CEOs for taking time away from creating jobs and running their companies to be here today. Thank you all.